The dawn broke with the chilling precision of a military operation. 5 figures, clad in identical HOA polos, advanced towards my property. Armed not with guns but clipboards and measuring tapes, they were led by a zealot, one sporting a GoPro strapped to his forehead as if documenting the storming of Normandy. Behind them, Karen, the architect of this suburban invasion, stood at the gate, her voice a piercing command echoing the orders of a medieval siege lord. They had no idea what they were walking into. I train law enforcement canines. This morning, my pack was off-leash, a force of nature waiting for a signal. And Karen? She had no clue that my father, a man with a government-issued laptop and an unshakable caffeine dependency, practically owned the regional power grid, the very infrastructure she was about to violate. "You want to make an example?" I asked him, my voice dangerously calm. He merely smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with anticipation. "Hold my coffee." You're probably wondering how a simple dispute over property lines escalated into a battle involving trespassing, airspace violations, barking dogs, and a retiree wielding the power of the federal grid. Buckle up, because this isn't just a story about a nosy Karen and her HOA militia. It's about the invisible boundaries we draw, the fragile peace between suburbia and the wild, and the explosive consequences of crossing the wrong man. My ranch sprawls across 40 acres, a haven of open space and untamed freedom, bordering a meticulously manicured suburb where every house is a beige echo of its neighbor. We moved here for the space, the peace, the ability to let our kids and dogs run free. Then Karen arrived. She bought the corner house, the point where civilization met the frontier, and appointed herself the self-proclaimed guardian of suburban sanctity. From the moment she hung her first Live, Laugh, Love sign, she became a relentless patrol, a hawk guarding the perimeter. Notes about unsightly fencing, complaints about goat bleeding during her meditation, and aggressive chicken energy reports to animal control. I endured it all, practicing the patience required of anyone who chooses to live on the edge. But Karen wasn't content with passive aggression. She infiltrated the HOA, formed her own subcommittee, the HOA Rangers, I kid you not, and unleashed them on the neighborhood. Their mission, ostensibly to enforce aesthetic harmony, was clearly to catch me, my kids, or my animals committing some infraction, real or imagined. I wasn't a member of their HOA, never signed up, never paid dues, never even received their rulebook. But logic was a foreign language to Karen. She claimed my mere proximity polluted the suburban ambience and demanded I adhere to their standards. I scoffed until the drone appeared. One afternoon, a buzzing drone hovered over my back pasture, a digital spy invading the airspace of my kennels. 6 canines in training, including 2 retired police dogs with zero tolerance for aerial intrusions, were not amused. I shouted a warning, but Karen, piloting the drone from her manicured lawn, ignored me. I grabbed my 12-gauge. Legally, I was in the right. Flying an unregistered drone under 400 feet over private land near livestock and children without permission is, to put it mildly, a bad decision. The resulting 10-minute screaming match at the gate, with Karen in full meltdown mode accusing me of felonies, was a prelude to the dawn siege. 5 HOA Rangers marched through the unlocked access path beside her fence, Karen barking orders like General Patton. One had a body cam, another a measuring tape. A third held a printed Google satellite map marked with little red X's. They were headed straight for my kid's swing set, the alleged violation of an imaginary setback line Karen had conjured in her mind. I watched them cross into my yard, a cold calm washing over me. "Well, boys," I said under my breath, "you're about to meet the locals." The dogs were already out for their morning exercise, unleashed and trained. One whistle. That's all it took. Chaos erupted. A dropped clipboard, a desperate scramble over the fence, a face-first tumble into a flower bed. One of my shepherds herded them into a tight, trembling circle, while my retriever, well, let's just say he marked his territory on their HOA flag markers. Karen's shrieks about lawsuits were drowned out by the rhythmic thump of the dogs' tails. I ignored her. It was time to call my father. Karen saw herself as a righteous warrior. What she didn't know was that half the violations on her printed Google map involved utility easements and access points for the local power grid. The swing set? Located squarely next to a buried power line, outside the HOA's jurisdiction. You want to make an example? I handed him the phone. He smiled. Hold my coffee. Being chased off a private ranch by a pack of highly trained dogs should have been the low point. But Karen had bigger plans. 10 minutes later, sheriff's cruisers arrived, lights flashing. But instead of arresting trespassers, the sheriff, a former colleague, spotted me and grinned. Still training those bite units for the academy? I nodded. You want to see their performance review? Karen's face contorted in fury. She didn't realize, none of them realized, that this wasn't just about barking dogs and plastic clipboards. Trespassing on land connected to federal infrastructure, sending a surveillance drone over livestock, physically interfering with power access markers. That kind of behavior goes far beyond the HOA board's pay grade. Tomorrow, the FAA would be paying Karen a visit. But first, she would discover the consequences of pressing charges and learning who the sheriff used to work for. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. Most people, after being herded off private property by highly trained canines while the sheriff chuckled in the background, would reevaluate their life choices. Karen doubled down as if on a holy crusade. The next morning, a 200-word rant appeared on the neighborhood Facebook page, accompanied by blurry GoPro screenshots. Karen framed herself as a humanitarian venturing into dangerous territory, claiming I had unleashed violent animals on peaceful code enforcers and brandished a firearm in the presence of non-combatants. That was the phrase she actually used. Then came the flyers, plastered everywhere, warning of aggressive dogs and a hostile rancher next door, printed on red paper with skull and crossbones. I hadn't seen that level of passive-aggressive graphic design since middle school. The final line, report all violations to the HOA rangers for immediate action. The HOA president called to apologize, assuring me Karen didn't speak for the board. The rangers weren't even officially sanctioned. But Karen was acting like sheriff of her one-woman HOA republic. Then things got weirder. Orange flags appeared in my field, marking a row across the training course I'd built for the dogs. It wasn't the county utility crew. They always called ahead. This felt sneakier. Security footage revealed Karen's rangers, under cover of darkness, tiptoeing through my pasture with a tape measure and a stack of flags. One of them tripped over a tire obstacle and face-planted, a scene I watched in slow-motion replay. I called the sheriff again. Same guy, same grin. He watched the video and shook his head. You know, he said, if I didn't know better, I'd swear they were trying to provoke you into doing something stupid. I smiled. I wasn't stupid. I was patient, and I had receipts. The drone wreckage, the footage of the rangers trespassing, the printouts of Karen's own flyers. The sheriff whistled. You ever thought about suing for harassment? Not yet, I said. But if she keeps poking the bear. The flagged field wasn't just random dirt. It was an easement, specifically an underground corridor tied into the regional power grid. My father, the man with the coffee and the quiet smirk, didn't just know about it. He had helped write the regulations governing access to it. When Karen's clipboard-wielding minions started stomping around with survey flags, they weren't just annoying me. They were interfering with federal infrastructure. My father made a phone call, short, professional. I didn't ask who he called. I just saw the change in his posture, the subtle shift in his shoulders that signaled something was about to happen. And it wasn't going to be subtle. Before the fallout hit, Karen made her biggest move. She filed a complaint not just with the HOA board, who had stopped responding to her emails, but with the county. She claimed my aggressive animals were a threat to Suburban safety, that my dogs were unregistered attack beasts. She submitted photos, one of my dogs mid-jump during training, fangs bared, looking like a Hollywood werewolf. She conveniently cropped out the police trainer standing 2 feet away, giving the command. The county sent an inspector. Nice guy, dusty SUV, badge, clipboard, exhausted look. I offered him coffee. He laughed. You must be the dog warlord. We walked the property. I showed him the kennels, the licenses, the contracts with police departments, the vet records. He nodded, took notes. Honestly, I don't see any violations here. Looks more like someone has a personal vendetta. I handed him the flyer. He read it, frowned, and muttered, "This looks like libel." He thanked me for my time, assured me no further action would be taken. But that wasn't enough. Karen was playing dirty, so I decided to return the favor, legally, of course. I filed a cease and desist letter through a lawyer detailing Karen's trespassing, harassment, and defamation. It included attachments, drone photos, surveillance footage, copies of her flyers, even a statement from the sheriff. The letter ended with a simple sentence: "Further violations will result in legal action and full pursuit of damages." But the real cherry on top? I reported her drone activity to the FAA, unregistered, flown over livestock and children, and within a certain distance of power infrastructure. All violations, all documented. The FAA doesn't play around. They're like the IRS of the sky. The ball started rolling fast. Karen didn't get the memo. The next morning she was back at it, standing at the edge of my property line with binoculars, muttering into her phone. One of my dogs sat calmly at the fence, tail wagging, watching her like she was a mildly interesting squirrel. I didn't confront her. I just raised my phone, took a picture, and sent it to my lawyer. Paper trail, always a paper trail. Even then, I thought maybe she'd finally run out of steam. Then, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single typed note. "We are not finished. The HOA has spoken. You have been warned." That's when I knew she was about to escalate again. What she didn't realize was I had already escalated higher, much higher. Somewhere buried in a file folder on a federal server, Karen's name had just been flagged. The next knock on her door wouldn't be a sheriff. It'd be someone wearing a badge with 3 letters. But first, she was about to find out what happens when you threaten a man who trains his dogs to stand their ground, and then decide to come back for round 3. The letter came 3 days later. Official FAA envelope. Karen didn't see it coming, which made it even sweeter. I didn't witness her opening it, but I did hear about the meltdown. A federal violation notice, complete with a hefty fine, a possible court appearance, and a very polite warning that further drone activity could lead to confiscation and civil penalties. One of my neighbors texted me the play-by-play. Apparently, Karen had marched to her mailbox like a queen checking royal correspondence, only to find a declaration of war. She screamed loud enough for the neighbor 2 houses down to think someone had died. In a way, someone had. Karen's fantasy of being an airborne surveillance enforcer had just crashed and burned harder than her drone. And yet, despite the sheriff's report, the cease and desist, the HOA's own board stepping back, Karen still wasn't done. She filed a lawsuit against me, claiming intentional infliction of emotional distress, psychological terrorization by my dogs, vindictive drone reporting, and my personal favorite, an unauthorized swing set structure erected in visual defiance of HOA harmony. My lawyer laughed. This will be tossed out faster than week-old fast food. But I was done playing defense. I countersued. Trespassing, harassment, defamation, endangering livestock, attempting to create a public nuisance. Documentation, videos, eyewitness accounts, even statements from HOA board members confirming that Karen had acted alone. My attorney called it a surgical strike. I called it the beginning of the end. The HOA board, realizing Karen was about to drag their name into a legal disaster, finally acted. They held a closed-door vote, kicked her off the board, and dissolved the HOA Rangers. Not an apology exactly, but a clear message. They didn't want to go down with her. One of the board members even stopped by to apologize in person. He'd underestimated how far Karen was willing to go. I told him I'd underestimated how far I was willing to go, too. Meanwhile, Karen began patrolling the sidewalk with binoculars and a notepad, filming my kids playing with the dogs and claiming they were training attack maneuvers. She accused one of my shepherds of looking at her in a threatening way. She filed an animal complaint over a dirty look from a dog. Then, it got better. That swing set, the one she wanted seized from the beginning. It sat 4 feet inside the power easement that my dad's team had mapped. The HOA had no control over it. We submitted the documentation to the court, a little reminder that if Karen wanted to argue about boundaries, she was going to lose. The FAA investigation was moving steadily. They'd reviewed the drone wreckage, pulled her flight logs, and confirmed she had flown the thing over protected easement land without registration, violating at least 3 federal rules. When she tried to argue that she was gathering evidence for a neighborhood safety initiative, the investigator asked if she was authorized by any agency or department. She said she was self-authorized. That didn't go well. She got hit with a fine. A full-blown 4-figure fine for unregistered drone operation, airspace violation, and endangering livestock. When that hit her mailbox, I got another text from the neighbor. This time the message was just 3 words. She lost it. Karen called an emergency neighborhood meeting at her house, handed out typed agendas, and tried to spin the whole thing as a personal attack orchestrated by anti-HOA forces. Only 3 people showed up, and one of them just came for the snacks. She ranted for 40 minutes about the decline of community standards, pacing around with a plastic wine glass and a stack of printed screenshots. When she got to the part about how I was using military-trained dogs to intimidate her into silence, the neighbor finally asked, "If he wanted to silence you, wouldn't you already be quiet?" That was the moment Karen realized she'd lost the room. The neighborhood's attitude shifted. Nods and waves from people who'd previously avoided eye contact. A family dropped off homemade cookies with a note. "Sorry you had to deal with her. Also, your dogs are awesome." 2 emails asking if I'd consider hosting a community dog training demo. Even the HOA board asked if I'd be willing to lead a safety talk. No dogs, just tips on living next to working animals. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. I showed up, spoke for 20 minutes, answered questions. No one mentioned Karen, except for one older gentleman who asked, "So, is she finally gone?" "Not yet," I said. "But soon." While Karen was busy railing against swing sets and imaginary boundaries, my lawyer had filed for a restraining order. Trespassing, harassment, flyers, letters, attempts to rile up the neighborhood. We had more than enough for a case. Once that went through, she wouldn't be able to step within 100 feet of my property line. She had no idea it was coming. Just like she hadn't known about the FAA. Just like she hadn't known that pushing a man who trains police dogs and understands property law was a terrible idea. She thought she was playing chess. Really, she'd walked into a minefield with a blindfold and a megaphone. I wasn't done. Not yet. While she was busy licking her wounds and trying to figure out why nobody was showing up to her HOA coffee and codes meetings anymore, I had one final move planned. Something quiet, legal, infuriating. A gesture so simple and petty that Karen wouldn't be able to ignore it but would have absolutely no way to fight it. And it involved a drone of my own. The thing about revenge is it doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes the best revenge is quiet, legal, and utterly maddening. I waited until everything was in place. The FAA fine served. The lawsuit backfired. The HOA rangers officially dissolved. The restraining order creeping through the system like a freight train she couldn't stop. Then I made one small purchase, a drone. Nothing fancy, nothing illegal. Fully registered, within legal weight limits, and flown strictly over my own property. Except here's the twist. Every time I sent it up, I made sure it drifted just high enough for Karen to see it from her upstairs window. Never crossing into her airspace. Never violating any rule. Just there. Humming, watching. Or at least that's how she saw it. The first time I launched it, she came outside screaming into the wind. I didn't respond. I was on my porch, coffee in hand, wearing sunglasses, watching the sky. She yelled something about harassment, but I didn't even acknowledge her. I just let the drone hover for 30 minutes. No footage saved. Just the subtle word of legal superiority. She called the sheriff, same guy as always. He showed up, looked at the drone, asked for the paperwork. I handed it over. Registered, approved, GPS log. He gave me a thumbs up and left. Karen stood in the street shouting after him, demanding he make it stop. He didn't even glance back. Over the next few weeks, I developed a routine. Every Saturday at 9:00 a.m., I'd launch the drone for its weekly perimeter check. Sometimes I'd fly it in simple patterns. Sometimes I just let it hover, Once I attached a tiny banner that said, "Have a great day." Nothing hostile, nothing actionable, but enough to drive Karen into a spiral of frustration that no law could save her from. She began obsessively filming the drone, building binders of screenshots, timestamps, annotated diagrams. She tried to report it again, but by now even the FAA had flagged her as a nuisance complainant. Her caseworker sent her a polite but firm email telling her to stop wasting federal time. It got worse when the restraining order came through, delivered by a deputy, signed by a judge, fully enforceable. Karen stood in her driveway holding the envelope like it was radioactive. She read it once, then again, then stormed into her house without a word. That night, she didn't turn on any lights. The house sat dark and still, like it was in mourning. The next day, the "for sale" sign went up. She didn't even try to be subtle. One of those big, flashy real estate signs planted in her front yard like a white flag. The listing was online within hours. Charming corner lot home in HOA community, ideal for peaceful suburban living. No mention of the federal violations, the drone wars, or the legal trail of her own making. She must have thought she could start fresh somewhere else. Maybe in a town where the local dog trainer didn't carry receipts and wasn't related to a grid engineer. But what she didn't count on was reputation. Word travels, especially in HOA circles, especially when you've been fined, removed from leadership, and legally ordered to stay off your neighbor's land. Buyers came, walked the perimeter, asked questions. One of them even wandered over and struck up a conversation while I was working the pasture. He asked about the neighborhood. I kept it polite. Told him it was quiet now, peaceful. Great place to raise kids, or dogs. I didn't mention Karen by name. I didn't need to. He looked over at her house, saw the security cameras, the faded flyers still half torn on the bulletin board, and nodded slowly. The house stayed on the market for a week, then months. Price dropped twice. While her home value plummeted, mine climbed. I got approved to expand the dog training facility, put up a new barn, added a fenced play area with turf and agility equipment, even got a small grant for veterans therapy training sessions. The community started showing up too. Parents with anxious kids, couples adopting rescue dogs, even a few retired officers who missed the structure. I ran classes twice a week, free on Sundays. Word spread. People stopped seeing my ranch as some wild, chaotic land on the edge of their HOA bubble. They started seeing it as part of the community, strong, steady, useful. Karen, meanwhile, was rarely seen. Occasionally, she'd step outside to snatch her mail or scream at a squirrel. But mostly, she stayed behind her blinds. The binoculars disappeared. The flyers stopped. Her energy drained like a bad battery. One evening, I saw her dragging 2 trash bags to the curb, her robe hanging off one shoulder like a defeated cape. For the first time in months, she didn't glare at me. Didn't even look in my direction. She just shuffled back to her house and closed the door without a sound. Then, one day, she was gone. No moving truck, no farewell. Just an empty house and a listing that finally flipped to under contract. The neighbors didn't hold a goodbye party. No one asked where she went. No one cared. I stood at the fence that morning with my coffee and watched the drone fly one last lazy circle over the field. I brought it back down, powered it off, and smiled. Justice hadn't come in one big moment. It came in pieces. In rules followed, papers filed, dogs trained, and lines not crossed. It came when her noise was replaced by silence, when the people she tried to rally turned away, when the very tools she used to intimidate me turned back on her. That's what real revenge is. Not fireworks, not screaming matches, just a quiet, steady pressure that never lets up until the other side folds in on itself. A few weeks after she left, a new family moved in. Young couple, 2 kids, big golden retriever. They stopped by on their second day, introduced themselves, asked if I'd be okay with their dog coming over to play with mine. I said, "Of course." We ended up talking for an hour. They asked if there was anything they should know about the HOA. I just laughed, shook my head and said, "Nothing they can't handle. Just make sure your drone's registered." The wife blinked. "Drone?" The husband chuckled. "Inside joke. Let's just say I told them this neighborhood used to have a bit of turbulence, but we're clear skies now. They laughed. I waved them off and headed back to the barn. The dogs were waiting. The sun was up. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like things were exactly the way they should be. Because Karen may have flown too close to the sun, but I let the dogs out. I kept the line, and in the end, that was all I needed.